All right, good day everyone. This is Jason Straight with PassCloud Virtual Group. We're here today for moving data to the cloud with Azure Data Factory, and our presenter is Simon Kingaby. Before we get going here today, I do have a couple announcements, so we'll just run through those real quick. So the first thing is that this virtual group is sponsored by Microsoft Azure. Microsoft Azure sponsors the group in hopes that folks will take a look at Azure when moving to their data platforms to the cloud. And being that a good high share of our presentations do focus on those technologies, that's probably a pretty safe bet. If you are not yet a member of the virtual group, I do recommend becoming a member. You can do that by going out to cloud.pass.org, and then out there, go to the login to subscribe, get logged in, subscribe to the newsletter. That'll get you aware of all of upcoming presentations, and then also once a week, usually a newsletter comes out that has all of the upcoming presentations and the next 3 in detail. So lots of. As far as upcoming presentations goes, we do have quite a few presentations on the calendar. We have almost 2 a week, every week through the end of January right now, except for those holiday weeks and during the Pass Summit. So there's lots of opportunities to learn more about data platforms and kind of figure out what you want to do and how you can get it built. That said, we do always look for more presenters. So we are on occasion throwing in a 3rd presentation a week, and then we do have a lot of time after January that people can present. So we're looking to get that all filled up so that people can plan ahead to different presentations, and then presenters can be prepared. So if you are interested in presenting, we do have a link out on the call for presenters, and then we also have an email address. You can either go through the link, fill the form, or send me an email address and we'll get you on the calendar. Coming this fall is the Virtual Pass Summit for 2020. Due to extenuating circumstances, there will not be a physical Pass Summit, but there is the Virtual Pass Summit that will be pretty much the same experience. If you have not yet registered, you can get a discount on that registration by using our discount code that's there on the screen. And then this virtual group is part of a number of virtual groups that Pass helps to support. Do take a look at them. There's lots that focus on different areas, such as Global Spanish and Global Chinese for different cultural presentations. And then also there's different technology areas like PowerShell and looking at performance. So lots of different opportunities there to learn as well. I'm sure some of you will have some questions throughout the session, and if you do, please type them into the question panel, and at the end of the session, time permitting, we will go through those questions. And with that, those are our announcements for our session today. And so I'm going to hand things over to Simon for his presentation, Moving Data to the Cloud with Azure Data Factory. Helps if I don't cover up my the thing there. How do I change presenter? There we go. I always keep forgetting how to do this. There we go. All right, Simon, you are now the presenter.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Moving Data to the Cloud with Azure Data Factory and display settings swap. There we go. Okay, that's my obligatory slide. A little bit about me is I've been moving data for my whole life, which is a long time, and got into Azure a few years ago and spent most of the time moving large quantities of data from a mainframe up to the cloud, and in particular into Azure SQL databases and what is now called Synapse Analytics, otherwise known as the Azure Data Warehouse. And so I've got a few things to show you, a couple of tricks I learned along the way, and one top secret thing that only Microsoft knows where it is, and I'm going to tell you where it is. So we're going to look at the copy activity, the very basic data factory flow, and then we're going to jump into how to secure those, how to use variables, how to, this is probably blocking your view. Is that better?
Yeah, it's not blocking this.
It wasn't? Okay,
No.
good. And the self-hosted integration runtime, which is how you get it on-premise data, uploading files to Blob storage. And as you can see here, we'll be looking at ways to do that, and then looking at how to trigger Data Factory activities. So that's my slides. The rest is demo. All right. So Azure Data Factory. To be honest, I've never actually clicked these buttons except to find out that I don't do what they do, and I've always gone straight to the designer. And sorry, those might pop up from time to time. So we're going to go to pipelines, and we're going to go here to new pipeline, and the move and transform activities. This is where we can find the copy data. And the copy data is strictly for a particular data source. So I have one here called source, and I have one here called target, and that's it. That's a pipeline. If you want it to do something funky like truncate table, DBO, target table, before it actually runs the copy, then you can put that in the pre-copy script down here. And let's see. Yeah. And that's pretty much a pipeline. These little magic tricks I did over here, grabbing the source and the target. If you click new, you can pick your data source. There are lots to choose from now. Didn't used to be so many, but now there are lots to choose from. The key is that if it's in the cloud, you have access to it through either native drivers, or through Odbc, or through an API. So Salesforce, for example, one of those three is what this button does. I don't know which one, but it does that. ServiceNow uses the ServiceNow Odbc and API, sort of, to be able to connect to ServiceNow. It's a native driver that Microsoft has written that works with ServiceNow. And as you can see, there are lots to choose from. So typically, a lot of our data is in SQL, so that would be a SQL Server for on-premise, or an Azure SQL database for the cloud. So then I can select a linked service. Now, linked services are basically the connection to an actual data source. So in this case, I'm going to select my SQL Server in Azure. And I apologize for the slowness. My computer has been acting really weird the last week or two, and things are just crawling. And this is just not cool. There it is, SQL Pass. And there's a database on there called SQL Pass. And the username is SQL to say. And the password I stored in Azure Key Vault, so I didn't have to remember it. And we'll come back to that in a few minutes. Would help if I remember what I called the password. So we will definitely come back to that in a few minutes, because I actually remember the password more than I remember the Key Vault name. So here is the connection tested. I got a green check mark. That is the holy grail of this screen. If you can get a green check mark, then you can connect to the data source. That doesn't necessarily mean you can connect to the tables and views in the data source, but the green check mark means you're connected to the data source. So in this case, I've created a connection to my SQL Server Azure SQL database, and I can then use that Azure SQL Server database linked service in the data set to pick a table. So here is a table, the source table, and then I can click OK. And I've now created a data set called Azure SQL Table 1. And it's using it here as the source. And if I go over here to data sets, I can see Azure SQL Table 1 has just been created. It has a dot next to it. So does my pipeline, because neither of those has been published yet. So what this means is right now these are sitting in my local machine and in my browser, not in my local machine, but in my browser, and they have not been published to the Data Factory itself. So if I hit Publish All, it will list what I've changed, and I can hit Publish. Some of you or most of you will have your Data Factory bound to a Git repository. If that's the case, you can't publish directly. Instead, you have to create a pull request to get your data, your changes from your branch up to the master branch. But Git is a whole nother 1 hour session, so I'm gonna stop there. We saw how to create a data set for the source. Creating a data set for the target is exactly the same. It's just for the target. And then there's an option here to do mapping. I very rarely use this option because my source and target are usually the same. If they aren't, you might want to consider making them the same so that it's easier. And by the same, I mean the same schema. So I have a source with a schema ABC, I have a sink or target with a schema ABC, and then I have another task which moves the data around from one schema to a new schema, or does some ETL on it or whatever. All I want to do typically with Data Factory is the lift and shift with the pipeline. There's this new thing called data flows. It's new as in it's been there for 2 years. That is much, much more like SSIS, has a lot more functionality for doing the transform and load portion of ETL. And so you can do a pipeline to get your data up into the cloud and then do a data flow to massage it into facts and dimensions or into SQL data database or whatever. Often our sink is a data lake. That's fine. It's basically just storage at that point. But those are some of the considerations for your copy activity and for data flows. Next, I want to show you the Key Vault, which is in here. The Key Vault is Azure's place to put secrets. So I'm going to click on Secrets on the left, and then you'll see I created a couple of secrets already. It's still loading. There. Okay, so we've got the on-premise database name, the on-premise password, and the database password for the cloud. Those secrets are in here. If you want, I can show you, for example, the on-premise DB. We have an Odbc connection string set up. And if you look at the secret value, which is grayed out but is right there, it is the DSN for on-site DB. So you can show and hide secret values if you have those permissions. You can expire secrets. You can copy the secret to the clipboard. But basically, the secrets is a place where you can keep secrets and not have them exposed as hard code in your code, your connections, or in the data factory or anywhere else. Most of the time, like it was when I was showing you here, the data factory will let you pick the secret. So you pick the key vault, and then you have to know the name of the secret. So in this case, it was DB password 2. And you can pick a version or not. Usually we leave that blank, and that way it picks the latest version. Again, my connection's successful, so I can apply that change. You'll notice there are 2 Azure Key Vault options here. If you pick both of those, then the linked service and the data set will not auto-publish. If you don't pick the Key Vault, then the linked service will auto-publish to the data factory, which isn't a problem. It's just not what you expect if you're using Git to use source code management. So be aware of that those passwords, you want to use Key Vault as much as you possibly can. That's Key Vault and securing your secrets. The next thing I want to show you is how to use a variable. For some reason, Microsoft in their infinite wisdom decided to move the name of the pipeline over here. So there's now a properties tab hidden under this little properties button, which shows the name of the pipeline. Everything else is down here in these tabs that are hidden at the bottom. So you can see I've got parameters. Those would be parameters I want to pass into the pipeline. And I've got variables. Those would be variables inside the pipeline. In this case, I've got a variable for source ID, and it's a string. That's pretty much the only choice: string, Boolean, and array. And I'm going to set it to 1, which is one of the values in my keys, I think. And then in the copy data activity, what we're going to do is select a particular row by this variable, by using this variable. It's a silly example. I'm just showing you how to use variables, but basically this is how. So you've got a variable, you go into the source, and whenever you click on, let me do it on another box. Some of these, you see this I add dynamic content link. So you can do that when this is empty. Empty it. You see it's got an empty query box. So you could type in here, but as soon as you click in it, there's a link to add dynamic content. That's the link you want to click to get to this interface, which allows you to put in expressions, and string concatenation is going to become your friend. This, unfortunately, is the tiniest font for presentations that I've ever seen. So I have trusty Notepad++, and now you can see a little bit better what is going on in here. Most of the time, I will bring these expressions out to Notepad++, massage them out here, and then put them back. Because there's just usually you have concat of concat of concat, because each concat only joins two things. It's not like in Excel where you can go on with comma, 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 chameleon, as much as you want. You have to only join two things. So if you want to join a third thing, that's another concat. But here's the expression. Select star from source table where ID equals concatenated with the variable source ID, the value of the variable source ID. Okay, easy peasy. So that is this expression. If it doesn't like your expression, it will say so. For example, that's invalid because I just took out the closing paren. Now it's valid again, and I can hit finish. Finish doesn't, that valid doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work, but it does mean that it's at least valid syntax. And when you've got 10 concats and a bunch of if statements in there, that really helps. Most of the time, the rest of these are just left at their defaults. But you can see I've got the source is now a query. It's this string. And if I ran this, it would just pull where, because I set the variable to 1, it would be the row where the ID equals 1. Next. Do we do questions at the middle or at the end?
We can do them in the middle. There is a question out there right now asking, okay, is SQL authentication the only supported authentication type?
No. It supports Azure Active Directory authentication. It also supports Windows authentication and SQL authentication. For the purposes of this demo, SQL authentication is by far the easiest. For the purposes of my day-to-day life, SQL authentication is by far the easiest. We have certain circumstances where we have to use Windows authentication using a username and a domain name and a hard-coded password, which of course we put in the Key Vault, but it's still it's a static password, so that Azure Data Factory can authenticate as that user to get to that data source. And then we have a couple of circumstances where we use something which is called a service principal in Azure Active Directory, so that Azure Data Factory can authenticate as an application against some other data source. So yeah, it does a lot of different choices. SQL authentication is by far the easiest, and given that you will probably have control over more of that world than you would over the Active Directory world, it's also easier for you to deal with, usually. Okay, so the next example is one that takes this idea of a variable and goes one step further, and that is a lookup. So in this case, I don't want to, in this case, what I want to do is I've got a bunch of tables at my data source, and I want to bring them all over to my target yes, to my target. In this particular example, I'm taking the 4 different data source tables and dumping them into one table. I could put them into 4 tables, that's fine. The nature of this example is that the lookup will go and look up the tables to move. The stored procedure is going to truncate the target table, and the for each loop is going to for each table in the lookup, copy the contents of that table into the target table. So I'll let you see what's inside there. So here's the lookup, and in its settings, we have a data source that is a data set. So if I look at that data set, it's just an Azure SQL database data set looking at a lookup table. And I happen to have the contents of the lookup table. Looks like this. It's got source table name and target table name, and its values are source and target. So basically it's going to pull from the source table and write to the target table. There is an option here. I could have multiple source tables. In fact, further down, I do insert those extra records so that I have multiple source tables all going into the same target table. And then Azure Data Factory just reads that lookup table and uses it to iterate for this copy activity. The trick is I want in the copy activity, the stored procedure, all it does is truncate the target. So the copy activity is inside this for each. So once I've clicked on the for each, I can click on this pencil to go inside it. Now the copy activity with lookup is the name of the pipeline. The for each is the name of the for each loop. And then here's my copy activity inside it. And it has a source. The source is a query. And in this case, the query says, this, excuse me. The query says, select star from at item with squiggly brackets around it. The item ends in regular parentheses, dot source table name. So the squiggly brackets here, or braces is their formal name, indicate that whatever's inside this expression is Data Factory expression syntax. In this case, you'll notice I didn't use concat. I could have. The syntax for the concat would be something that said select star from, comma, live coding. Like so. Notice the @ sign moves to the front of the expression. The quote marks that we use are single quotes because this is SQL-ish. So you can think of it that way. And there is no @ sign or curly braces because I'm not using it as an expression inside a literal. Instead, I'm doing string concatenation. So it's just item paren dot source table name, and then a closing paren for the concat. Either of these, line 7 or line 8, would be fine. I just wanted you to see both syntaxes. So I'm going to hit finish. And for the sync, we need to make sure that the sync is also parameterized. The trick here is if I look at the data set has a parameter. And the parameter is the target table name parameter. And that needs to be filled in by the data flow. The pipeline, not data flow. Wrong word. All right, so I've got a parameterized data source or target. It has a parameter. In the connection, I've used that parameter in an expression, which is just that parameter is the table name. And then in the pipeline, you'll see that we fill in that parameter with the item.target table name, which is the item from the loop, from the for each loop. So the copy activity with the lookup looks up the tables for the source table and the target table dynamically, pulls those in, runs this copy activity for each row in the lookup table, and for each source table, it writes out to each target table. Now, as I said, in my example, the code here puts all the data in the same target table, but it could be different target tables. And I've used this logic when moving data from an Oracle schema, where we basically just had to lift and shift the data, I hate that phrase, sorry, to the cloud. And then after we got it there, we could massage it and move it around and do all funky things with it. But we just had to get it there. And the easiest way to get it there was to create one of these lookup tables, loop through 100 and some odd tables of Oracle, and have them shifted up to the cloud in the same structure that they were in Oracle. And the Data Factory was actually pretty good about mapping the data types. So we were able to just use that lookup function and set up a source and a sink exactly like you see here, and then leave the mapping tab blank and let it take care of doing all the data types and mappings. And then once it's in the cloud, then you can go back and say, well, this shouldn't be a timestamp, it should be a date time, or a date time 2, or a date 2.7, or whatever, right? So you can manipulate the data once it's in the cloud. And theoretically, the cloud is a much faster place to manipulate it, especially faster than the pipeline on the way to the cloud. So we really tried hard to just make the movement from on-prem to cloud as simple as possible. And then once it got to the cloud, then we did the hard stuff. All right, so that was that example of using a lookup table. The next thing I want to show you is the self-hosted integration runtime. That's this guy. This piece of software is an application running on, in my case, my local laptop, but you would run it on a VM or a server in the cloud where it has access to your on-premise resources. So it could be a VM in the cloud, it could be a VM on-premise, it could be anywhere, but it has to have network access to your on-premise data sources. And on the machine that is the self-hosted integration runtime, on that machine, it has to have all the drivers and other bits of software you would need to be able to connect to the data sources on premise. So for example, if you have an SAP database, you have to have the SAP drivers installed on this machine, the self-hosted integration runtime machine, so that you can create a connection from Data Factory. When you go here, whoops, and you create a new source and you pick SAP, I didn't pick source, I picked a target, sorry. New. So you can pick SAP and you can pick BW or HANA or whatever. And if you've got an on-premise SAP HANA machine, great, more power to you. But in order to connect to that, your on-premise SHIR, the self-hosted integration runtime, has to have the HANA drivers and the HANA Odbc setup so that you can connect through Odbc through this SAP HANA connection. Yeah. I don't know that it's actually using the Odbc connection, because SAP, it does something weird, but it definitely, you have to have that set up on this machine so that this will work. Yeah, so that's an example of using the self-hosted integration runtime. There is a little known secret. So in Azure, in the Data Factory, we click on this little toolbox or suitcase or whatever you call it, and there's integration runtimes here. There's always an auto-resolve integration runtime, and this on-prem SHIR is pointing at my laptop, right? So it's connected, as I can see by the green check mark. Let's say I wanted to create another Azure Data Factory, and I wanted to reuse my on-premise, where did it go? I closed it. Anyway, the on-premise SHIR. In order to do that, I need to use this top secret piece of information. And that is that I cannot change through the user interface in the runtime. I cannot change the data factory that it's connected to. Let me try that again. There is nowhere here to change this. So my SHIR is connected to this data factory. Well, if I want to change that, there is a PowerShell script buried deep in the Microsoft Integration Runtime folder called Register Integration Runtime. You run that and feed it the gateway key, and it will, of the new runtime gateway, and it will change the registration. A lot of people do uninstall reinstalls and hope that works. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. This works every time, but it's not very easy to find. So there it is. For example, that gateway key. So I'm in Azure Data Factory. I click here, and I'm in the wrong factory. That's not good. Okay, so this ONWTM class DF2 is the name of the data factory that my runtime is actually connected to. In order to connect it to this data factory, which is called SQL Pass 2ADF, I had to link it. So I linked it right here and used the gateway key, which is this secret code here, and was able to, or I think that's the subscription, but anyway, was able to link the runtime from one data factory to another data factory. Now it's connected to both. This code that I showed you here is if you want to switch it, not so that it's connected to both, but so that it's connected to a new one. That happens if somebody blows away your old one, which is an accident that can happen. So if I accidentally hit delete, I would have to create a new one, and I would have to create a new, change my on-premise accordingly. All right, back to the data flow, data pipelines. So one thing I want to show you is using that Odbc data source. So I have on-premise, I have a database, and it has the same source table, target table that we've been looking at in the cloud. I have the self-hosted integration runtime, and I've linked it to this data factory. So now I'm able to create a, oops, that's the Azure SQL database. That's not the one I wanted. That's the one I wanted. Using the on-prem, notice here I choose instead of the automatically resolved self-hosted integration runtime, I resolve to the on-premise one, using the SQL Vault, the Key Vault, sorry, to get my on-premise database connection string. And I'm using the Key Vault to get my password for this user ID. And if I did it right, it will eventually connect. Anyway, while that's doing that, so that's the difference. The main difference here is when you are creating your on-premise stuff, you're going to make sure you pick the on-premise SHIR as your connection runtime. The rest of this is basically the same for SQL in the cloud versus SQL on-prem. And it's often La La Land.
And while that's running, we got a couple questions related to that came in.
Yes, please.
Can one SHIR be used for 2 ADF instances if they're in different regions?
I would think so. I haven't tested that, but I would think the answer is yes.
Okay.
Because it didn't care about the region. They may have to be in the same subscription.
Okay.
They may not. Yeah, good question.
Okay, and then can you please show how to find the gateway key for an ADF so that I can change it for the self SHIR?
Yes.
And send it to the new ADF.
I can. So somewhere down here, I have a different resource group. And in here, all right, so let's talk while this is loading, uploading files to blob storage. So once your data sets get over 10 to 50 million rows, Data Factory and just sucking them up through the self-hosted integration runtime, that becomes very, very slow. And so the way you want to deal with that is with files. And in particular, something that we call blob storage in Azure. It's basically just file storage in the cloud. Blobs are just big files, or any files really. And so you want to create a storage account. Where is it? Here it is. A storage account such as this. And in there, you're going to create a container please sign in. Yes, in there, you're going to create a container for your blobs. Then, I have too much stuff going on the machine here, sorry. Then, once you have a container for my blobs in your account, then you can upload files. So you can click upload, and this tool is called Microsoft Azure Storage Explorer. It's a free download. It's not as polished as perhaps some apps that Microsoft makes, like Word, but it is a fairly useful tool, and you can grab things like pictures of your cat. No, maybe not. I don't want to go there. Anyway, you grab things, upload them, and they go up to Blob storage, and they're there. This is one way, is you physically do it through the user interface. The other way, let's see if I can find that file. I'm going to upload a file. And it's going to be in FCM. All right, that's a little file, so it should upload fairly quickly. Down here, it's transferring it. All right, so it's transferred it. Yay. The point was, now I got this link over here that says copy the AZ copy command to the clipboard, which I could then bring over here to Notepad and see there is the AZ copy command to copy a file, fcm.txt, to blob storage. Overwrite to local blah, 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 blah. All of the rest of this is not really relevant. What is important is now I have a command line command that is PowerShell that I can use to upload a whole bunch of files directly to blob storage. Just change the name of this, right? The rest is pretty much boilerplate. So that is very useful to be able to upload those files using AZ copy instead of the user interface. Now, somebody asked a very good question, which was, where do I find the gateway key? How much time? Okay, 12:47. I've got about 10 more minutes, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, good. Should be enough. Okay, so here is the integration runtimes. Here is the SHIR, and this is the data factory it was created in. So here are the keys. So the gateway key that I need is this IR at blah, blah, blah number. I've never had the download and install work. I always have to, no, sorry, the opposite. I've never had the express setup work. I tried clicking this link a bunch of times. Instead, I have to download the runtime and install it manually. That's fine. Either way works. When you download it and manually install it, you have to register one of these keys. And once you register the key, this runtime is bound to that data factory until you run that PowerShell script that I showed you in the Word document. And that is the answer to that question. Is that question answered satisfactorily?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, good. All right, I'm going to close that then and come back here. Yeah, that's the database. Okay. All right, so it's finally connected, and so I can hit apply. And now I have a link from the cloud to my on-prem data source. All right. So one of the challenges, once you've uploaded the files to blob storage, you've got to get them into a database. So there's a few ways you can do that. One is you can set up a copy pipeline, just like we did for the SQL data, only the source is going to be a text file. So if I go new, I can pick here Azure Blob storage. It's going to be a delimited text file. In this case, it's a CSV. And I'm going to select Azure Blob Storage, which I previously set up. It's this linked service that points at that blob storage. Then I can pick a path. I want to go into My Blobs. And as long as you've done this once, then you have a file up there and you have something for this template to work with. Now you can see the file path is My Blobs. That's the container name. In there is a folder or directory, and then the file name. Well, I can parameterize any of those things after I create the data set in the first place. So in this case, the first row is a header row, so I'm going to check that box and then click OK. Yeah. And that's my source. So I can also change this to a wildcard file path where the path is My Blobs, and I can search for a particular file or file names. I can also make it a list of files. So this will be one particular file found by file name, by wildcards, and this is a list of files, at which point I can do a for each file in the list, do something to it. So if I've uploaded 150 Oracle tables as delimited files, good luck, because they'll mess up the data somewhere. Nevertheless, if I have those 150 files uploaded, I can use this list of files to pull all the files from my container and run them through a copy activity or some ETL or whatever, because they're already in blob storage. Now they're basically in the cloud. So I've already done the hard part of getting them from on-prem to in the cloud. There is another way that you can move blobs into SQL databases. This was using Azure Data Factory. And the other way is using a SQL bulk insert. So I'm going to go back to SQL Server and show you this code. What this code does is this first line creates a master key. If your database has never had one, it will need one, and you do need to be a a server admin to run this line of code. So you probably have to get a DBA involved to run that create master key. And when they say why, you say because you need to create database scope credentials. And they'll be like, what? And then you have to explain the whole thing of what you're trying to do. But creating a database scope credential requires you to be a database admin, not necessarily a server admin. The database scope credential is where you put this thing called a shared access signature. That's this long string. The shared access signature is what gives SQL Server access to your blob storage. So where do you get it from? You get it from the blob storage, because that's what you're getting access to. So if I flip back to blob storage, here, you will see access keys. And these are not what you want. It's always there. It's first, you think, oh, access keys, that's what I'm looking for. It's not. These are not going to get you in. What you need is a shared access signature. These are a set of permissions that are tied to a given secret key for a given period of time. So I'm going to say I want blob access. I don't need any of these other things. I need access to the container and the objects in the container. And I want read access. Maybe list. I don't need any of that other stuff. And I don't delete versions. I'm going to set the dates to a few minutes ago or yesterday and sometime in the future. This can be a long time in the future, but not forever. Like you can't put $29.99. It's got to be a certain, I think it's like 2 years. You can set the time zone if you care, and which IP addresses are allowed to use this key. If you leave it blank, it's all IP addresses. You pick a protocol, and then which key you're going to sign it with, and then you generate the SAS, or shared access signature, and you get these 3 things. The SAS token is the one you want. So we take a copy of that and we drop it into Notepad++, and we think, okay, great, we've got exactly what we need for our connection. But there's a difference. This is the one I just pasted, right? What's the difference between this one and this one? For some reason, there's a question mark on the front of it. I'll take that off, and now this token is the token that I drop inside these quote marks. Okay, but I do have to take this question mark off the front. So that's one of the mysteries of the universe. I'm not sure why they did that, but that question mark doesn't belong there and doesn't work if you try to use it in the secret. So once you've created the database scope credential, which is what gives SQL Server access to the blob storage, you then create a data source that says use that credential that we just created and connect to the blob storage at this address. Well, again, this address comes from blob storage. So we can go up to the overview and containers. And I'm almost out of time. Any other questions?
Yeah, there's a couple others here. One is, let me see here, I can find it. Where would you view set security settings for connections or data in transit?
Data in transit is going to be secured by the pipeline that it's transiting over. So most of the time that's HTTPS or TLS, I think. I don't think it's anything fancier than that. There may be one other, TP. I know it's TCP/IP, but then there's one other too. Anyway, those are the stuff is secured in transit because of that, not because of anything that you do. Not sure if that was a useful answer, but it was an answer.
Yeah, and then the other question that's there is how do you handle the change of a password in a pipeline, which is pretty much under this in the same general space as the last question.
Okay, the change of a password in the pipeline would be you change it in the Key Vault, and you make sure you're always using Key Vault. The other thing I wanted to just finish that example with is once you've created the external connection, you need to create a stored procedure that uses that connection to do a bulk insert. All of this code and all of the instructions that I was looking at are in a Word document and a PDF. I will make the PDF available to the group through the organizers. And thank you very much. I hope it was useful, and I hope you have a great day.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for attending here today. Hope everyone got as much out of it as I did. And thank you for attending. And with that, I'm going to close things out. And thank you once again.
Yeah. Do I just email that to you?
Yeah, email it to me and then I can get it posted.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent. All right.
All right.
Everyone have a great rest of your day.
Bye, everybody.